Audio test for Gatehouse. Gatehouse, can you hear me?
Drag that over there, and then where it says, click on that. Does that work?
And you know what, here's the thing.
But it should be okay. Actually, that's okay, but before it was, you found before it was.
They got one more question. Oh, that's how, you like drag it over. Drag it over.
But you don't have to watch it. The limit switch is no good. Now, when that thing open, the power is going to stop. The limit switch is no good.
Maybe.
Make sure that don't open your open it, you can make sure that don't open it.
Yeah, there it is.
One row.
Drag it over. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Yeah.
Probably was, right? Okay.
Oh, you have no idea. How much more than no idea, right, the answer? Trust me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay, so then.
Yeah, what's gonna go wrong?
Starts to.
We're good.
Should I?
So you never want to start a meeting.
Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. If everybody can go ahead. I know there's people trickling in, but we've got a busy agenda this morning. And with that, thank you for being flexible with the schedule changes. That has been helpful. We're going to start this morning. We're going to start this morning with our recess policy. I know this came to the table at our last meeting, and it became obvious that there was a need for further discussion amongst the group. So I want to spend the majority of our time discussing with each other. However, Dr. Ivy and Ms. Klemenko have been kind enough at the last minute to put together a very quick overview for us. So thank you, and I will hand it over to you.
So good morning, everybody. and we're happy to be here. And I'm sorry, I'm just getting settled here. Trying to get my brain together after vacation. So just to take a walk back in history a little bit, middle school recess was first discussed back in October in 2018 by Sandy Evans, who brought it forward in a forum topic. And it really was the specific concern around the 3 middle schools in 6, 7, 8, and the concern that they did not have recess. And at that time, the request was to ask staff to develop a draft policy regarding the provision of recess for middle schools across FCPS. And that work was done, but it really didn't lead to a final decision or policy. And so then in March of 2020, and that was right before the pandemic, Dr. Anderson and Ms. Pekarsky brought it forward again in a forum topic in which they asked us to look at an unstructured break, an outdoor break for middle school students, again with the specific concern around the 3 middle schools for 6, 7 that are 6, 7, 8, but again also looking at all middle schools and the concern for both health and wellness. And so we took it upon ourselves to look at that work, look at what models there might be to work with the middle school principal associations and to all within the midst of the pandemic and to see what we could come up with. And so we worked with the middle school principal associations, and then we also worked with the governance committee to then come up with the language that we posted a few weeks ago. And so I think I'll ask Ms. Klemenko to go over the specific language in the policy. And what we did was we updated the Health and Wellness Policy 2100.
So good morning, everyone. And I think if we can skip forward maybe 2 slides, because Dr. Ivy, I think, did a good job covering sort of the history of how we got to where we are today. So what we've done is we've just sort of excerpt, and this has been posted to board docs since new business, but we've excerpt what is being added to Policy 2100 to both codify middle school recess and to bring over language that currently lives in a different regulation about elementary recess, so that everything can kind of be in one place and be in policy. So taking a look at this, and I want to first say I just appreciate the patience of governance as we went back and forth and round, as you all know, wordsmithing these things and capturing just the right messaging that will be clearly be able to be implemented is challenging. And so there was a lot of good discussion and a lot of work by the governance team to get to where we are. So these are excerpt, as I said, is a very lengthy policy, 2100, and there's one section on activity. And so we've included it in that section. In that first one, number 2, the only change was to add middle school to the recess. And then as we go down to 3, 4, and 5, these are all brand new additions to the policy. The first one is really intended to emphasize that it's going to be daily, right? That it's going to be daily, and this is elementary school, and for a minimum of 30 minutes. We do have in the regulation that recess shall be provided in 2 segments as practical, with one segment being at least 15 minutes in length. And just for a history on that one, when we did a lot of work with our parent advocate groups around recess, that was something they requested, thinking that shorter, more frequent breaks, especially at the younger ages, would be helpful. So we brought this language, actually exists in Regulation 3218, and we just brought it over. Number 4 doesn't exist anywhere except for in this policy because this concept of middle school recess and codifying it is brand new. But it definitely, again, talks about daily. This past year, as schools have been implementing and trying different types and formats, they haven't necessarily been daily. So next year, as this policy goes into effect, we will be excited to see how they do daily. And it's a minimum of 15 minutes. And the final one there is really the emphasis on making sure that students have the opportunity to be outside. That we weren't going to at middle school force that students go outside, but we want to make sure that students have that choice and they have that option on a daily basis. If you flip to the next slide, please. These last two were probably the ones we spent the most time on, and maybe the ones that we want to spend the most time on here, is really trying to get our some guidance out to schools around the importance of recess, and that it's not, recess is not something you earn and you get if you're good. Recess is something that all students need because it's really important for their mental health and their wellness, and we know it has a positive impact on academic achievement. So we wanted to ensure, and this has existed previously in the elementary reg, so this is a slightly updated language, but that no part of recess can be taken away by a teacher or instructional staff, so for disruptive behavior or any kind of reason. So that recess is sort of guaranteed to students. But number 7 was added that there are times when an administrator may need to make a decision that recess isn't appropriate for a student or maybe a small group of students based on safety and security type issues. So we added that language in number 7 to try and capture that. So it's really trying to just separate out a teacher making a call of, you haven't done your work today, you need to stay inside and do your work, and then something that really is much more significant that an administrator would be involved in making the call. So those are what we have added to 2100 to represent what we think was the intention of the board.
So with that, if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you. I really appreciate you all getting this together, and thank you to the governance committee that I know has spent a lot of time working with all of you to be able to bring this to us today. I think in order to be efficient, I think this board has made it clear that we are big fans of unstructured breaks and we realize the science behind it, but there were some wonderings and concerns that I know people want to share. So Tammy?
Thank you, and thank you all for going over this again for us to give us the history. And as Stella just said, we are a fan of structured breaks for our students in elementary school as well as middle school. As you know, there were some of us, and I'm glad we're here today so we can kind of talk this out. I did have the opportunity, because at the time on 2 weeks ago, I had not had the opportunity to speak to my middle school and secondary school principals. I have since done so, and I will tell you, they do have a little bit of a concern on 5 and 7. For number 5, I think what I have heard, and I don't want to propose the language yet, I want to talk about the whys first. Quite a few kids I have heard from the principals, their break needs to be, they are the introverts of the world, right? And their break they need a break from the big spaces, and they want a quieter space. They want somewhere to be contemplative, either to play board games. Uno is a big thing now again. I understand in middle school, I've heard that over and over again in the comments. And so things like that where they can have a quieter spot, that's how they can rejuvenate. So for number 5, and they felt, and Noelle, I heard what you just said, but that's not what they were hearing, and that's not what they were seeing in the policy. You're like, we're not going to require outdoors, but since the policy doesn't state that, one potential bit of language I was thinking, and Karen and I were talking together, but Karen and I didn't talk about this language yet. We didn't connect this morning. But so for number 5, keep it as it is, the last part, participate in outdoor recess, weather permitting. And at the end, add something like, or provided indoor activity, i.e. such as board games or individualized reading. Making certain it's not an activity of their choice, because they won't be able, schools can't do that, but they can provide as a provided indoor activity, games, things like that. So that's one thing I would like my colleagues to consider. And the other thing, of course, was and I think we're going to need to think about this as we move forward in a more productive way. I think this may be the first step. But I think we need to think about the footprints of the schools and we may have to do some investments in our middle schools. I had someone tell me that they can't even walk to their space because it's not elementary school where you walk out the door and the playground's right there. They couldn't even walk to their space in the allotted 15 minutes. I have some that have very small footprints. They have buses there. They have big street access. I've heard some funny stories too. So, but go ahead, Francis.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we go on, I just need us to approve Ms. Cohen, who has submitted a written request to participate virtually due to a personal conflict. All those in favor of approving the request? Thank you. Thank you.
So I actually have a list from the middle school principals where they have listed just challenges or things from that as far as footprints of the schools and enhancements that they would like to see that would help recess in the future, that I wanted to sit down and work with facilities on as we work to improve and enhance in the future. And so I plan to sit with facilities and see what we can do as far as planning.
And I think, Jeff is gone, but I do think that's going to require an investment. It's going to require an investment, and it's going to require buses to be moved.
Yeah.
It's going to require a lot of things. I see my time is up, so I might need to go back, but I'll let Karen speak to, and I mean, I think I'm pretty good 1-5. You can speak to 7.
And there's some short-term things that I think could be done for next
Could you
year.
elaborate
And then there's
a little
some
bit?
long-term things that do involve money.
Could
that
you
would
elaborate
take
the short term?
planning, like moving buses possibly, but then more long-term things that would be more expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Well, thank you. First of all, very excited that this is coming to fruition. I feel like it's been a very long time. I remember sending this over to Ms. Corbett Sanders when she was chair, right before we got started here. So very excited to be here and looking forward to having this come to a close. Can you speak a little bit, because as part of governance, we have been hashing this ad nauseum. And one of the things that I know we spent quite a bit of time talking about is what has been the engagement with the principals. You just mentioned a little bit about the list. How much of this language have they been able to review and give feedback on? If you could just enlighten the rest of the group on that.
Sure, we worked extensively with the Middle School Principals Association and the language around whether or not it should include, and I'm trying to look at my notes here, whether it should include, whether it's that students should have the option of going outside or the option of other activities or not. And I will say that in the end, what has been presented, the majority of that group were pleased with the language that was presented, and that came from that group. That was the language that we presented, that we, meaning the Middle School Association and Noel and I, that we brought to governance, and they supported that because they saw that as they had the option of being either indoors or outdoors. And Noel, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think that I think that Tammy is correct, that schools have different challenges, right? And certainly our secondary schools, we talked a little bit about that, the size of our secondary schools versus some of our smaller middle schools. So there are definitely challenges, and I'm sure if any of you all spoke to individual principals, they would express their challenges. But I think we did the best job we could to bring everybody to consensus, to bring people to where something that would work for everybody. There was definitely a lot of discussion whether students for their own good should go outside, right? Because we all know the benefits of being outside, but I think we definitely landed that that middle school students needed the option.
And when we started with, and I think the notion at first was we wanted everybody outside, and it just wasn't working. And, we were trying to push for everyone going outside. And that we quickly saw where that just wasn't going to work. And I think we then got to a different kind of options and schedules, and we were flexible this past year with an every other day schedule, and that helped as well with the commitment that they would take this past year to figure out how they would make it work for this upcoming year, that they would have this every year. And they have all committed and have figured out how they're going to make it work for this upcoming year for the minimum of 15 minutes every day for next year.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify that while you worked with the associations, they went back and worked with the entire group of middle school principals. Okay, wonderful. One of the things that I want to stress is that I believe what I'm hearing from you is that this language provides the flexibility. As a parent of a middle school student who had been working with the middle school principal since last year to try to establish something this year, I come home every day to a child that's telling me that even on the most beautiful days, on the days he's supposed to be out, he is not getting out because his teacher decided. This is not supposed to be teacher choice. This is supposed to be student choice. Had he said, I decided not to go outside today, that would have been fine. But this is a kid who does want to be outside, and his teacher has decided that that is not an option for him. So I want to be very clear that this language should not be staff-driven, and I'll speak about the principals in a little while. It should be student-driven. It's student choice. Going back to number 7, one of the things that we talked about, again, significantly at governance was how to make sure that principals can still handle the business of the school without teachers taking away recess. As a former principal myself, we in Loudoun County, recess could not be taken away by teachers. It could be taken away by principals to do the business of the school. If you're doing a threat assessment, investigation, that doesn't stop and say, oh, it's recess time, go outside. You still continue that work. And it may mean that a child can miss recess. While I didn't think it was necessary, but definitely the conversation led to the fact that we needed to be more explicit about number 7. So I am fine with number 7 as it is because it provides the administration with the flexibility that they need with that. For right now, and I thought, I just remembered it. So I do want to be sure that we're not shorting those students. They're not getting 30 minutes the way that the students down the street at Providence are. They're getting 15, and that 15 cannot be compromised. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work on this, both to my colleagues on governance and staff. Everyone should know that NBC4 is, as we speak, at Herndon Middle School doing a show on middle school recess, on how excited the kids are to have the opportunity for middle school recess. So it's all a good thing. And the schools in Drainsville have done a really good job of implementing it this year, and the families really like it. But I do have, Cooper Middle School, for example, is under renovation. So, I just want to raise that, and I think maybe it is already covered either under 5 or under 7. Because of the renovation, there are safety concerns about different spaces on the ground that can't be utilized. So in many cases, there's not enough outdoor space available to make sure that everyone is outside through the renovation process. So So I guess, also supporting what Ms. Darren Kofax was talking about, there just are situations where outside might not be the right answer. So as long as we feel like 7 or 5 takes care of these various buckets of situations, I would be okay with that, or just so that
Yes.
principals understand that they can make a call or, give students a choice.
They very much so do. And I think part of what the principals really wanted the flexibility to be able to do is to also involve students and have students have a voice in actually planning what other options there might be and activities that would be available, and even have different quarterly kinds of activities. And so from what I hear, there are many examples of a rotating schedule of activities that are available, with outdoors always being the constant that continues to rotate through.
Okay, because of course, everyone knows I'm a huge proponent of outdoor, having kids outside, but do appreciate your comments also about the spaces. Cooper Middle School is a great example. They have, their courtyard is developed. They use it very heavily. It's an incredible outdoor classroom space. We just need to make sure that everyone has that available to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Brabrand, did you want to comment? Or
I think I'll wait, thank
okay.
you.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Yes, thank you. I too am a big fan of outdoor recess. I'm actually of the age where when I was going through Fairfax County Public Schools, we actually got a 15-minute break during our high school day. So I think this is a great improvement. I do have similar concerns as my colleague, Ms. Darren Kofax, regarding the conversations we had with principals who were at the table and have, upon further reflection, requested some minor clarification so that we actually capture some of the ambiguity that people are concerned about. In particular, in paragraph 5, perhaps the way to fix it, because we want to make sure that it is student-centered, is to allow students to choose between outdoor recess or an indoor activity. And then in paragraph 7, as written, it seems to be a safety or security concern impacting the whole building. And so the concern there is trying to capture exactly what you said, Dr. Ivy, about the importance of having the principal be able to make individual decisions about not only the whole school maybe not going out on recess for a lockdown reason, which, by the way, living close to the Route 1 corridor, that does happen quite often, or being able to make decisions based on individual students where there may be a safety or security concern. That doesn't mean that you take away, what it does mean is giving the principal the ability to address the safety or security concerns associated with the school or individual students. And those would be the two slight modifications that capture the spirit. And then just because I was listening to Dr. Anderson, and I would be very happy to support a modification to this that would actually do a carve out of 2 15-minute breaks for our 6th graders in the Mason district, if you think that would be useful. That would definitely get you your 30 minutes. And because I don't have schools like that, I would depend on you to make the suggestion, but I think that it is important. Thank you.
Dr. Ivy.
So do I hear you saying to possibly amend number 7 if there is a safety or security concern associated with the school or an individual student that impact the availability of recess? The principal or the administrator?
That would be what I would suggest. And how do you feel about that?
I'm fine with that.
Good clarity.
That's good.
Excellent. And similarly in item 5, paragraph 5,
And then as far as,
basically allowing the school to make provisions so there's an indoor space and an outdoor space.
One thing we have to be careful of, because number 5 right now applies to elementary and middle,
So
right?
maybe-
And elementary, we might need to be a little bit more clear, because elementary, usually the whole class goes out, right? Or the whole class stays in. There's not that choice factor that plays in. So we want to just be sure that when we write number 5, that it works for either both levels or that we split it.
I would suggest then we split it, given the differential, and that also allows us to address some of the concerns of Dr. Anderson as well.
as far as the sixth grade at the middle school, the 2 15-minute breaks, Dr. Anderson?
Can I talk to you about that a little bit more? Because I know some of my schools, it's a huge challenge. And
Right,
so
I'm
I'd like to
thinking
have a
about
little bit more
scheduling.
detail,
I
and
would
I'd like to
wanna-
speak to those folks.
Okay.
Glasgow particularly is the one that's top of mind, and I know they're trying to do some things a little bit differently for next year that may lend
Yes.
itself to that, but
Yes.
I couldn't speak to it today, right now.
So maybe we have to table that, so we're not getting into that discussion here, because Ms. Cohen is next.
Thank you so much, and I'm almost there actually. But I just appreciate the conversation and the massaging of the language. You know, as Dr. Anderson said, we worked really hard on governance to try to capture exactly, you know, what you're talking about, because we shared similar concerns. So I'm fine with the proposed, you know, edits to kind of further clarify and refine that. I think that's really important. And, you know, we did speak extensively about how this applies to the 3 secondary schools, because that's certainly a wrinkle, you know, for us. I know that that Ms. McLaughlin and I represent 2 of those 3. So it's certainly first and foremost in our mind of how did they accomplish it. So I really appreciated all the work that Dr. Ivy and Ms. Klemenko did to go back and really try to hash out with those principals where we could find common ground and make this work. And I'm really pleased with the final product. So I absolutely support this. I'm so glad, and I appreciate my colleagues doing the extra lift of reaching out to their middle school principals and making sure, because sometimes we don't have kind of a one size fits all. So I appreciate all the extra work that folks put into getting it right for everybody. So I fully support it, and I agree that the tweaks that we've discussed make sense. The only thing that I would add is, you know, I do think our principles, whether we want to codify it into policy, is something I know altogether different. But our elementary school principals, I think by and large, really do try to provide the opportunities for kids who don't want to go outside. So I just want to make sure that I don't want what we do to in any way disincentivize the principals who are able to have kids go to the library instead, or you know, sit quietly somewhere else with another class. I know a lot of principals go out of their way, and teachers, to make sure that the kids who don't feel comfortable going outside still have opportunities.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. I'm going to make the case for the language as it is. And also say that I don't think it matters if we change it, because I don't think it needs it, and at the same time I don't think changing the language hurts it. So here's the case for keeping it as is. Section 3 prescribes that there will be recess for elementary school students. Section 4 prescribes that there will be recess for middle school students. Section 5 simply says that schools must allow students to have recess outside. It doesn't say that it's required of students. It just says that you are required to give recess in 3 and 4, and that recess must be available outside. kids can still go have recess in the hallway or in a different room if they want to. The question, and so it's a question of what the word allows means. I think it's certainly much broader than requires. I also appreciate that many of the things that have been brought up in this conversation are the things that came up during governance over and over again. So it tells us that we were in the right track of thinking about the different issues. For item number 7, again, this is a case of, I don't know that it doesn't change anything if we add the language, and also, at the same time, I'd say that means we don't necessarily need to do it. If there are safety or security concerns that impact the availability of recess, what do we gain from saying for an individual versus a school other than adding a couple extra words? Intrinsic in the way that sentence is phrased, it includes both of those things. So I would argue that everything that's been raised thus far today, while perfectly fine to add to the policy, don't bring anything additional to the policy that isn't already there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to focus on the language. I'd like to, first of all, say thank you for doing this work. I think it's been a long time coming. I actually hope that we are able to give our kids a little more time. I know we're not there now. I think we're in the process of continuous improvement, and that's how I'm looking at this. So I just have a few suggestions along that path, working toward continuous improvement. I would really like to see a type of, and perhaps I missed this explanation, but a type of needs assessments in various schools. I know that there are schools where you have a certain populations that may have specific needs. That's what I think we need to be listening to, right? To try to figure out I'm seeing a higher level of anxiety, or I'm seeing kids, not mingling or needing to be by themselves. Then I would like to see some work to figure out how we address the needs of that particular school, and perhaps give them a menu of things that they can do, right? That may come into your conversation, Dr. Ivy, where you said you would be talking to us about facilities changes. I'm thinking in terms of quiet rooms. I'm thinking in terms of, whether we have kids that need that, perhaps that tactile function where they have an opportunity to calm down in the way that they can, and we take the needs of the students in that particular school into account as we try to figure out how to implement this policy. So that's the first thing. The second thing is some of the comments that I've heard from my colleagues suggest that perhaps there is some professional development that may need to occur with staff members understanding. For example, Dr. Anderson mentioned that, her son regularly is having a teacher make that decision. I'm not talking about any particular person, but what that suggests is that perhaps there's not the understanding of how this type of break and the activities that can occur enhances the learning environment. So I'm wondering if there needs to be a component of professional development as well. And of course, with respect to the needs assessment, I would hope that, and I didn't hear this, I'm sorry if I missed it, I'm wondering if perhaps we can bring parents into the conversation so that is being taken into account as well. With respect to safety concerns, it would perhaps be helpful, I think, to note the other regulations that can put into place. I'm always concerned with respect to discipline and things of that nature, whether we are creating a potential for disparities. And so perhaps a structure to oversee that might be helpful so that we, are making sure that we're helping all students. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. We'll take those into consideration as we move forward.
Okay, seeing as Ms. Marin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think I appreciate Mr. Frisch's recentering, because this policy, this section of the policy, Section 4, is about physical activity. So it actually is imperative, the intent is to promote children's movement because that is developmentally appropriate when they've been sitting all day, although I know a lot of our classes use a lot of flexible seating and movement. And I have also advocated for quite a while, as some others have, for the sort of spaces where children can be calmer, quiet, focus. That's why I've been having discussions for months now with our facility staff about outdoor spaces that can promote time for reflection and or just to walk around and be by themselves. So I think that it is absolutely essential to include the outdoor piece because that is also research-based and showing that children need to be outside. In fact, driving here today, I looked at the sky and I said, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if our kids could be outside like this whole day? That brings me to my next point, which is we're talking about a cultural shift, and this policy does a lot to put us in that direction. But the cultural shift is in the designing of our spaces, our new facilities, but our current facilities, and we know that places are doing them. But even yesterday, Dr. Braber and we were talking about how Herndon Middle School, the PTA is raising money to purchase basketball hoops. Why is the PTA having to fund basketball hoops? Well, because traditionally there hadn't been a time for kids to be outside and play. So this is something now that we need to consider as we budget and do CIP. What kind of recess equipment or spaces are needed? Okay, that's a cultural shift in how we budget, how we design. There's also going to be a cultural shift for our staff to know that it's essential that kids have time outdoors for recess, and they need to protect and maximize that time unless it's an extenuating circumstance. And our students as well, they're going to need to understand that they have a choice, but they also are going to need to dress for the weather. And if our students don't have access to weather-appropriate clothing, I've already heard from some PTAs who want to create those banks of clothes. I mean, we're not going to send them out in pouring torrential downpours, but it's okay to get a little bit wet or to get a little bit of sun and learn to put on sunscreen. I mean, these are life lessons that we're teaching students to go out and to be healthy and be in the world. I also think that, ultimately we're talking about safe and accessible space, and we're talking about developmentally appropriate space. So I do agree that the language as written with the edits from the governance committee is completely appropriate. I think the space to take a break, to play the Uno, to meditate, to pray, to do whatever someone wants to do is a parallel track here, and we need to create that space outside. I also will put in a plug for, could we start to talk more about intramural sports? Growing up in a place where I could play on soccer, as terrible as I was in middle school, as a parent now running my kid around to travel soccer, it's still a cultural phenomenon I don't understand here, and I know that parents want their kids to be able to stay after school, and some middle schools offer that. But that is a great conversation that we can have, but this policy at least helps us secure that time during the school day for that outdoor break time for kids. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take my turn. Thank you, Ms. Marin. I think, your vision, I think we are working towards some of that. And this is probably the first step, but I think it is going to be a process. There has been a cultural shift in FCPS. When my oldest started here about 15 years ago, you would go to the playground and I would lose my mind because along the fence would be all the kids who were sitting doing their work. Because recess had been taken away for different reasons, usually because of behaviors that they couldn't control, for which they really needed recess. So there's been a cultural shift, and I appreciate that, and I'm excited about the middle school shift, but it does bring with it some, different challenges, and I'm fine with the language. The reality is, for some of our older students, we may need to scaffold that decision-making student choice, but it needs to be scaffolded sometimes to make good decisions because of the facilities that aren't prepared for middle school. The fact these kids are larger, the staff challenge, it's just different. So I think as we transition and we work through these, I'm fine with making the clarity so our principals understand that they do have the ability to do what they need to do to keep everyone safe, but at the same time understanding that is not an excuse for providing children what they need, and that is the default. And I think we're doing a good job of making that message clear that that is the intention and the expectation from principals. I do agree we're going to have to look at our outdoor spaces and do something there. So I'm excited about where this could go. Most people who are parents love this, I will tell you, because we know, our students are not robots. They need time off. All of us need breaks. But I have heard one question, which is where are you getting these 15 minutes from the day that you're now taking away? I think I know the answer to that, but I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about, there are transitions during the day, so that has given us an opportunity to officially label maybe.
Yeah, I think it's during the passing times or transition times during the day. There could be a minute off of lunch. And so they've carved the time out of those times, the break times during the day, transition times, and a minute or two off of lunch.
Thank you. And basically, we are not taking away academic time to do this.
Absolutely not.
No. In classrooms, there are transitions that are always happening. So thank you for that clarification. I'll give my 20 seconds back, and we'll do maybe a minute and a half for our 3 go-backs. Ms. Corbett, you don't want to? Oh, okay, I thought you told me. Okay. Dr. Anderson. Okay, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to what Mr. Frisch and Ms. Marin have said, so I want to echo everything that they've just said. I do think the language as it is does capture the conversation that is happening now. But the main thing that I wanted to share is that this is being piloted a little bit this year. It was supposed to be less of a pilot, but in advance, but here we are, it's a pilot. But I do want to stress, there are some schools that are doing this very well, and I cannot wait to shout out Poe Middle School because they have set up a wonderful structure. In their outdoor space, it's not close to their cafeteria, but they have equipment, they have space, they've made it a place where the kids want to go to. And they have, 850 students?
I believe so.
So I do want to say that there's a model that if the other principals were interested in looking at, it's, because we visited all 3 of these schools together. And so my middle schools. And so that's one that I think may be helpful in helping folks who are having maybe a harder time realize what perhaps could be. So Principal Panuti, thank you, and staff.
Yes, there are different models around the county. There are different challenges. They look different, as you visit different schools. There are many principals that have poured different resources into the models and embraced, the concept of it. There's some who have struggled and for different reasons. But again, the commitment is there. And as an association, they're sharing ideas and are ready to go for next year.
And I think just keeping our eyes on the fact that our students really benefit by this opportunity is going to be the driving force. I do want to say, just to make sure, since this came up, I do want to reserve the opportunity to investigate the grade 6, having 2 15 minutes as you suggested, but this is not a conversation for now. I'd like to have more conversations with Dr. Ivy and the 3 middle school principals who would be impacted by this. Thank you.
Mr. Koufax.
Thank you. I do want to say I am happy that this cultural shift is occurring, and I am really impressed in talking to each and every one of my principals on what they are providing, but they are limited in some spaces. But we're talking the courtyards, the class breaks, the things that they're doing because there has been this cultural shift. So I hear my colleagues, we are a little split, but I think Ms. Corbett-Sanders and I will be bringing language on Thursday. We would like to work with the 2 of you to help us with this language for clarity on items number 5 and number 7. And we will be reaching out to you to help us as, there has been support from many colleagues who would like additional clarity, as well as in speaking to our principals who would appreciate the clarity. So we'll be bringing forth that language and would like to, we'll propose something, bring it to you, work with you, and we'll propose it on Thursday evening.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Look at us. We're 10 minutes ahead. I'm not going to jinx us, so we will make a change here. Ms. Cohen, I think you are leading the trust policy.
Do I want the taller seat?
You want the taller
No,
seat.
I'm fine as a little person.
Looks like a jacket.
I want my feet to touch the floor.
Oh. Forgot about that.
All right, good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to say I so appreciate all the work that has gone into this. I feel badly that I think the trust policy came to governance like 3 times. We kept sending it back for more changes, and that was in addition to all of the work that was done on the front end. I think at the end of the day, I'm excited to hear for everybody to see it if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But really, the most important thing that I'd like to draw people's attention to is the crosswalk with the county policy. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Walls and Dr. King and get us started.
I just want to say thank you to the board for your work and support in this policy. The team has done an awesome job, and Kathleen is going to share with you the crosswalk.
Thank you, Dr. King. And not all members of the team are here yet. I don't think we ever expect to run early. So thank you for that. And we can get started and they can jump in as necessary. So to be joining us are Ellen Kennedy, Deputy Division Counsel, and Dr. Iona Spikes, Director of Equity and Family Engagement. Additionally, we have represented today Rich Polio, Director of ESOL Services, and I see he is here early. And we will also welcome from student registration, representing that office, Elizabeth Donaldson, who is the Manager of Multilingual Services. So we look forward to welcoming our colleagues, and we'll just jump in and get started. So. If we could go to slide 2, please. And do we have a clicker? All right, so the primary goal of the trust policy is to serve as a written commitment that our students and their families will be able to access services and benefits without being asked for immigration status or have information reported. Because Fairfax County has a similar trust and confidentiality policy established in January of 2021 and aligned with the One Fairfax policy, it was critical to prepare a policy to govern our work as we ultimately serve the same students and families. I'm not sure what that was, but we'll continue on. The governance committee has been so gracious in giving of their time and careful consideration to the policy and its components in centering our students and their families in a safe and welcoming environment within FCPS. We are one of the largest and most diverse school systems within the United States. With approximately 180,000 students, we recognize the diversity of our students and families. As you can see on this slide, our families represent over 100 correspondence languages, 187 home languages, and almost 200 birth countries. Additionally, 20% of our student population are English learners. We endeavor to equally represent and celebrate the diversity of our students through this policy. And I want to welcome to the table Dr. Iona Spikes, our Director of Equity and Family Engagement, and Ellen Kennedy, Deputy Division Counsel. The trust policy is aligned with our caring culture goal number 2 of the FCPS strategic plan. We will continue to demonstrate a welcoming and inclusive culture in which our families and students feel safe, welcomed, and valued. We also want to ensure that we are providing our staff with clear expectations around how they should interact with our students and their families.
In preparing the policy, the governance committee looked at two bodies of information. The first is the crosswalk between the Fairfax County Trust and Confidentiality policy and the FCPS trust policy. Though there are likenesses between the two, the main differences are that the county's policy is geared toward residents and county services and benefits available to them versus the school's policy that has been tailored to students, their families, and the FCPS benefits and services provided to them. Additionally, you might note that there is a difference in the number of directives to the superintendent in the last section of our policy versus directives to the county executive. The second set of documents that were reviewed is a compilation of trust policies, action plans, handbooks, websites, and guidance in school districts that are like FCPS in size and demographics. These describe access to school property, the role of FERPA, and other strengthened anti-bullying policies based on race, ethnicity, and immigration status. An example of a very extensive toolkit is the School District of Palm Beach County's Immigrant Support Plan, which includes resolution and district protocol, agencies and programs, family safety planning checklist, legal, medical, and social community services. Beyond high school and scholarships, and instructional resources, which include lesson plans and links to educational materials for K-12 educators working with immigrant students. There are specific definitions that are included in the policy to ensure that we establish common language for all. The key terms are listed on this slide and are further defined within the draft policy. As stated, it is important to identify and name key commitments of the school board around the policy that aligns with a constitutional right to equal access to a free public education, regardless of immigration status of students or that of their parents. These commitments are the critical components of the policy and include that the school board affirms that every student has the right to attend school and access all resources therein in a safe and welcoming environment, that students' physical safety and emotional well-being are paramount to their ability to achieve in school, that FCPS families and students should feel that schools and classrooms are safe, inviting, and inclusive, regardless of immigration status. The commitments of the school board continue that a safe and inviting environment would be disrupted by the presence of immigration or ICE enforcement activities. Such activities create a climate of fear and stress that would impact all students. That every FCPS site is a safe place for students and families to seek help, assistance, and information. And finally, that FCPS employees are responsible for protecting the privacy of students and families and shall not disclose personally identifiable information except in limited circumstances as outlined in policies 2202 and 4220. Nothing in this trust policy shall be construed to conflict with federal law as set forth in General Order 604 and Fairfax County's Public Trust and Confidentiality Policy. Thus, we will refrain from requesting, accessing, or disclosing prohibited information to protect confidence and enhance the trust of our students and families. This does not change the manner in which FCPS staff members can access and use student information on an as-needed basis. Section 5(1)(b) gives employees the ability to access and disclose information that is required to fulfill the mission or obligation of FCPS, disclosing as necessary to fulfill, again, our mission and obligations. This is already the expectation for staff use of student data. Often, a challenge for immigrant families is to obtain standard documentation that verifies identity and/or residency. Understanding this policy allows for some flexibility in terms of acceptable documents for school registration. Finally, included in the policy are lists of responsibilities and expectations for specific internal stakeholder groups who will be most likely to interact with immigrants, students, and families most frequently. Again, the purpose here is to establish common language and expectations division-wide. Here are some examples from the policy to include employees who will reinforce confidentiality obligations. The Office of Division Counsel will coordinate all immigration-related inquiries. Administrators will ensure compliance at school level and communicate with students about data collection as needed in various contexts, such as discipline investigations. And the division superintendent or their designee will review contracts and agreements to limit information shared to the extent possible and to facilitate annual training for employees who handle these information requests. As a reminder, in board docs, there is the trust policy, the crosswalk, examples and highlights from similar policies in school districts throughout the United States, as well as the policies that were referred to within trust policy. These are part of the board docs that are made available to the public as well. Thank you for your time today, and I invite the rest of the team to make any comments as needed. Otherwise, we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Did anybody else want to speak? Okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and start with questions. I have Dr. Anderson first, followed by Ms. Omish.
Thank you. I probably will need to go back, so I just want to share that. I do want to say thank you to Mr. Frisch for bringing me into this conversation. It has been something that's been going on for parts of my community, but he did say, let's work on this, let's make this happen, and I'm so very excited to be here, so thank you. I also want to say thank you to Ms. Kennedy. I can't even think about the number of conversations we have had. It has been, I don't know, it's been a lot. I just want to say this. It has been a lot. So thank you for your patience and your work on this. I also want to say thank you to the Governance Committee because we have come back and forth with this probably 3-4 times minimally. And so I'm very excited that we're here and this is going to be something that we move forward. The reason for this policy, and thank you, Ms. Watts, for putting this together, is that we have some families who do not feel safe in our schools. And this is manifested in a number of ways. They don't access the services that we have. They are not filling out, meal applications when they so desperately can need them. And I could attest personally to a family that would not allow their child to complete a school assignment because they were afraid that this would get them in trouble. One of those All About Me posters, that's where our families are, and this is why this is so important. If we can do this very small thing to provide them with some more trust in our practices and in what we have going on in our schools, it will really open up the world to them. And I know this to be true because all of us received a letter, I think it came yesterday, from Diane, who is here, who talked about the ad hoc coalition in support of the school trust policy. If you open up that letter, you will see the signatories on this include so many people. We've got CASA, who is here, ACLU People Power, ACLU Virginia, the ADL, the Legal Aid Justice Center, EduFuturo, NAACP, Engage. There's so many more that I have not even talked about. If you look at it, it has probably 30. And I bring this up because I really want to underscore how important this is for parts of our community. This is not a small thing to them. It may be just part of our work, but this would really help our folks feel safe in our schools in order to access the supports and services that we have available in our schools, because right now they're not taking full advantage of that. I also want to say 2 things. I know that there have been questions in talking with folks previously, why do this when the policies already, a policy already exists from the county? is because we're a different enterprise. We have some very specific things that we should be speaking to that we provide that are not available in the county. There are some good touch points, and that crosswalk really helped to show where we have some areas of commonality, but we do have a lot of differences. And I think spelling this out here, what's going to happen from the rooter to the tutor, is very important. And I think that's my time. I'd like to go back.
Oh, boy.
Write that down, Carl.
Yeah. We have Ms. Omesh, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
I'm happy to follow Dr. Anderson. I want to echo gratitude to everyone who's been involved. This is obviously a really important step forward and a reflection that as a community, we begin to shift and really humanize one another to a different level, which is high time that it happens. I also want to acknowledge folks in the audience who've been longtime advocates for years and years to get us here. So thank you to CASA and the many partners who've brought us here. So I'm kind of in mixed places about this, mostly because as a communication, as a commitment, as a principle, 100%, obviously, I think we're even delayed on this, right? But then I want to make sure that what we signal matches up with what we were actually able to do and the thoroughness of this language. So I do have a couple of questions. Can somebody delineate just what will change in actual practice versus messaging at this point through this policy?
So again, your question is what's going to change in practice? And I think a lot of these things that are listed in the policy are already in place. And we also know that what follows policy is the establishment of regulation. And to me, the most significant change would be a very comprehensive training plan for those staff members within FCPS who will be working with in some capacity our immigrant students and families. So that's the biggest difference that I see. And again, a lot of these things are already in place. We're not changing the work. We're not changing necessarily all of our practices, yet we will have a very comprehensive training plan so we can be sure we share that common language and we are implementing practices in a very consistent and uniform manner across the division.
One thing more I would add is, I think it got to something that Dr. Anderson said. To know us, we hope that to know us is to trust us, but not every family has the relationship yet. The trust policy is elevating to policy for the first time. Practices that we may have done, protocols, has it been done everywhere with fidelity? Right? Maybe, maybe not. And elevating to our community, yes, we are open, we are inclusive, and you can trust us. And that does come with additional training. So I'm not going to say that we've done it perfectly, and you know that we haven't. But elevating trust, partnering as the county has done to say that our doors are open, they're inclusive, and before you even get to know us, what you should expect from us is a culture and climate of trust. I think that is the big step here. And then there is going to be the continual training that we need to do and elevate. And we'll be sharing this trust policy if you have it with our principals at our all-county principals meeting just later this coming month.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, because, trust is earned. And I struggle with this a little bit because we almost should have done the work before we signaled to the community because the stakes for even one family are way too high for us to not get it right. Perhaps, I'd like to see, I don't know what procedurally is an option here with this policy, but we need to embed disincentives to control behavior. I mean, we can't just say, hey, we're open, while we know people who are bad actors in every system are going to share information. That's been the problem already, right? Because we're not changing practice. That's precisely the point. But there have been people doing this. And then, of course, the FCPD relationship is a whole nother component that we need to unpack because ICE may not be the only agency, and there are ways to get around that. And then, you end up through FCPD automatically getting things into the state database, and that's very easy to report through the state. So I don't know that we're here. I think there really needs to be a lot more reflection about the loopholes, the ways that this manifests in real life and will impact people. So I want to ask about that. Can we think through not just language, but language with legs that back it up? Like if something like this was to happen, what is our disciplinary procedure, because we take this that seriously? Or what disincentives are we going to put in place structurally to make sure information is protected or not accessible? Is there going to be accountability, ways to track who has information and where it ends up? I mean, this is, again, I'm really nervous to tell the community, hey, everybody, our schools are safe, and we're not putting in place the right things to make sure that's happening.
So I'll take this one, Abrar, and thank you for the question. You know, I don't think it's appropriate for the policy to list any disciplinary action, because we already have that when employees violate anything, any of our regulations, policies, then it's appropriate for us to use our HR policies to discipline students, and we would do that in violation of anything that an employee does in the county. So putting it in policy gives it what you're asking for, right? The practice was in place. The enforcement of the practice makes it easier when you have it in policy and regulation, and that's why we're going this route. But when it comes to disciplining employees for violating any of that, we already have those policies in place through our HR department. We don't put those in policy.
Right. No, I mean, I can appreciate, just a violation of policy has procedure, but there's something, again, the stakes on this are so high to me that I'm struggling with the communication, the community obviously I'm going to support something like this, right? Like I'm a huge believer in this. Y'all could have guessed that before I opened my mouth. But I don't know that training is enough. And that section VC on FCPD's relationship gives me pause. What does this look like in the discipline space? I mean, that we lose control over that. And we're telling our kid, right? Like if a kid is referred to that, what?
And Ms. Omesh, your time's up, so I'm happy to list you as a go back. No, please feel like you can answer it. I wanted you to be able to finish your thought.
What this looks like in the discipline space for students, right, when FCPD is involved? No, I'm saying we're making a commitment, right, that our students will be protected. Student gets in trouble, student gets referred to FCPD. That's not even in our control anymore. So that is, like, one example of that is already us not fulfilling this commitment.
Okay. So if you notice on the crosswalk, Fairfax County, they've listed specifically addressing the law enforcement and what is the role, thank you, and what is the role of the FCPD, and that they're responsible to facilitate community trust by not enforcing any federal civil immigration laws and statutes. And then what we put in is actually mirroring that, but it also expands to our school resource officers. So it is addressed in the policy. And I go back to kind of what Kathleen said, it is going to take like a training to the point of having a mind shift, right around what you can and cannot do and how we are making sure that our students are protected and following the rules that are in place. So that part of it is addressed. Also, I would add that we are thinking about operationally when we're looking at registration processes, when we're talking about like what's in the SIS data and things like that, but also around how students are identified as well as categorized, and thinking about how do we calculate those numbers, understand who we are serving while remaining anonymous as possible, so if information is leaked or shared, these students and these families are still protected. So those are some of the things that we've discussed around what you're saying. Things can happen and, information is shared, but some of the safeguards that we talked about that would be in the regulations would address some of those things.
It's my time, but I'll take a go back.
I'll put you on a go back. We have Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. My comments here will be very similar to the last topic, because I see this board as being on a progression of really trying to move toward building that trust with the community, expanding our priorities to our policy, which is where it should be reflected. We had some of the same concerns when we developed the MOU regarding our SROs. And so I applaud the efforts to try to improve always the access to a caring culture for all of our students in every way possible. So first of all, thank you to all the people that have been mentioned. I won't go through the whole list like they do on the Academy Awards. So my concerns I'm going to raise just from having read the actual policy, and I'm looking toward communication, consistency, and any impact on implementation. So I certainly hope that as part of this, there will be some way that we are communicating to the community that this is a change and that we're working with our communications department, but also including in that a way that they can communicate with us if they have difficulty. So oftentimes we appear to be unreachable, right, when there's a problem. Sometimes they go to the ombudsman, but given the history of difficulty with communications with some communities that have fear, I think that we need to make a strong effort to make sure that we're providing that. With respect to on page 3 of the policy, I do see a slight inconsistency in Roman numeral 5, 1, A and B. The last sentence there in A says, nothing in this trust policy shall be construed to conflict with federal law. But if we go to the paragraph below in B, it refers to required by valid state or federal law or regulation, judicial or warrant, and so on. And so I'm just wondering if you see a need to make those two things consistent, because I would hate for it to create confusion amongst those people who are trying to implement this. It's on page 3 of the trust policy. This is not my time. This is clarification. It's on page 3, Roman numeral 5, 1, A and B. There's two different descriptions kind of what we're adhering to. And I just, you know, I'm anticipating problems. Yeah. So I wanted to point that out.
Thanks. We will try to align those. I mean, I'm comfortable with where they are legally, but if you feel it creates confusion, we're happy to look at that language.
Right. Well, given my experience, yes. The answer is yes. That's the short answer. Okay. On page 4, Roman numeral 6, 2C, refers to what records are kept. My concern here has to do with, in my other life, I deal with a lot of school records, and there typically is a copy of whatever the family has presented. And so I'm wondering, given our practice that I have seen, not just in FCPS, but across the Northern Virginia region, how that plays out. I'm not expecting an answer today. I'm just telling you in my practical experience, that is what I have seen. So I think we need to anticipate how we deal with that, and I'm going to need to go back.
You got it.
Does anybody want to respond to that before we move
I
to
want to make sure I understand.
Sure.
Are you concerned that things are maintained that should not be, or that people will read this that they're not maintaining things long enough? Which
the question you asked shows the problem. Confusion, right? I think we need to be clear on what that means, because I can tell you in my practice, in representing I don't know how many kids and looking at so many records, I typically see in the record an actual copy of whatever the parent has brought in, right? That is a record of some sort. This seems to suggest that there would be no notation of what they brought in, But in practice, I see that there is a notation.
So I will just say, from a high-level perspective, what we tried to do is not create any separate obligations within this policy that would conflict with our management of student scholastic records, larger document. And that's why we also reflect, like the school enrollment policy in Reg 2202. We're trying to align. So rather than expand, I'd almost recommend then that this get a little bit pared back there. I want to cross-reference rather than create anything that could be inconsistent.
I'm just trying to avoid that.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, followed by Ms. Derenak Kovacs.
Yes, thank you, and I'm glad to follow my colleague, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. First, I do want to thank everybody for their work on this. This really has been a continuum that began the discussion when we did the SRO MOU several years ago, which begs the question. Embedded in the SRO MOU is an obligation to do annual training with our SROs. I would like to better understand how we will incorporate this into that training. And secondly, also embedded into that SRO MOU is a requirement to periodically review that agreement. And I think that this dovetails with that, the importance of doing just that. As you have appropriately said, what we're really doing is centralizing a lot of the work that has already been done and then lifting it up in an education piece and communication piece, not only to our staff and personnel, but also to our community. And there's some good language in here about just that. I do have some concerns about how we will address the vendor relationships, because there is significant amounts of data that is shared with our vendors, and how you will include this policy in that relationship. So I'd like to better understand that. And thirdly, I do want to bring the attention of my colleagues to a conversation via email that I had with Ms. Kennedy because of a concern I had regarding the state obligation on how we accredit schools, and that we have 2 schools today that have notations on their accreditation based on absentee data and on dropout rates. And to be able to ameliorate against that situation, what we do have is we have incredibly dedicated administrators and teachers who actually go out to the community and look to find these kids and encourage them to come back into our buildings. So what I would love is, Ms. Kennedy, for you to address what you addressed in writing, which you said you think that it's covered, but I'd like a little bit more precision so that when we do the professional development on this, that we actually clearly signal that that type of outreach and relationship building with our students is not discouraged, but instead encouraged.
Thank you. I don't know that I hope I do. I'm going to start with the last one, though, because that's what I was prepping for. The discussion that we had, and we've had it with a couple of these questions have come up in various areas. And so the intent, and this is some language that actually came from the county as well. So if there's a thought that this doesn't completely encapsulate what we're doing, happy to look at it. But on section 5.1b, in terms of other person identifiable information, it's meant to explain to families, this is how we use data, and we don't, no staff member accesses more than they need for their role, and then no staff member is going to disclose more than they need to again, fulfill their obligations and do their jobs. And so there's not an intent in this, and that's why we sort of added also in the PowerPoint, there's not an intent to change anything that we're doing when we're doing it right. And I think that, from what we can tell, we're doing it right. People are very aware of these things, and where mistakes are being made, then they're being addressed. But if it's required to fulfill your job with FCPS, then you're able to access it. And if you're and this kind of goes along the same lines with the vendor. We have a really robust student confidentiality addendum that we put on all of our contracts with vendors, such that we are then permitted to give them the information that they need to fulfill their contractual obligations with us, and they're not allowed to use that data for any other purpose, like marketing, like disclosing it to anyone else. Like, they have to give it back to us at the end. As long as we maintain the control over that data throughout that vendor relationship, we're covered. And so that is a practice that is in place. There's an obligation here that each contract will be reviewed to make sure that that addendum is then in place. And so that's part of, I think, what will happen. That'll be another training piece and another sort of probably something more robust in the regulation. But both of those things, and so when you talk about training, I think that the bottom line for staff is it's really more reminders around how we do student data with this sort of underlying principle to lift up the importance of it all. This is why we're doing what we're doing.
And
did I answer all?
You answered some of them. Still would like to better understand the SRO MOU revision or review period as well as the training. And then I will add one additional piece, which is regarding individual volunteers within a school building and whether or not we need to do more dedicated training of volunteers on what they can and cannot share about student information.
Well, let me take the SRO one. We do have that annual review and annual training. Our training usually happens in the summer with our police officers. So you're passing, we're hoping that you're going to pass this at our next board meeting, right? Isn't it on for our next board meeting? So that gives us 3 months, a 3-month runway to develop the resources and training that we would be normally bringing them all together with our SROs, principals all in the same room to go over it. So I feel good about being able to do that. The volunteering, I think, is a great idea. Like, I don't know how well we've done about talking about volunteers and data and giving them the same sort of treatment that, like Ms. Keys-Kamara was talking about, that we need to do with all of our employees. So I think those are two things. The SRO MOU will take care. We have training planned. We just have to add this to it, and we will. Once it's passed. And on the volunteers, we can look at that as a different component. I think, Kathleen, we have a volunteer program, and we can just add this to a component. Though a lot of our volunteers, to be honest, aren't dealing with student data, but those that are need to be given this training. And we'll figure out the right way to put that in.
Dr. Brabrand, I appreciate that, but actually some of our volunteers may not have specific data, but because of what they're seeing in a classroom or having access to, they may inadvertently share
Right.
something that we don't want.
No, we'll need to do universal for every volunteer with more targeted approach for those that end up working in school counseling offices or in the front office and may incidentally come across more student records than just a general volunteer. We can do that.
Thank you. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, would you like me to add you to go-backs? Maybe.
I'm confident that my colleagues will ask many of the questions I have, but if not, I may add it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, we have Ms. Darnett Koufax, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Thank you, and thank you for all bringing this forward. As Dr. Brabrand said, we are elevating to policy what we have done for many years and advocated for many years is a safe and welcoming environment for all of our students and our employees. So I appreciate this. But as such, as a policy, I do have questions because I want to ensure that while we are doing this for all the right reasons, because as Ms. Corbett-Sanders said, we did this when we talked about this when we reviewed the SRO MOU. We talked about this in SCIPT many years ago, and the county came out first with this policy, but this was brought forward by SCIPT. Diana, you're here and you've been there and part of it and the journey all the way, so I appreciate your advocacy. But I do have a couple questions. So I'll start where Ms. Corbett-Sanders left off a little bit. On page 6, talking about the PTAs, Dr. Brabrand, and training and what we are going to do, how are we going to bring those into the fold? And I am a little concerned that they will be encouraged. I guess I'm okay with the language because they will be encouraged not to make submission mandatory for membership. So I get that, but the volunteer base for that was a concern when we brought it up at SCIPT. How are we going to manage that? Have you thought about that as far as, what will the training look like? How can you have a volunteer base where you're looking to bring in parents, particularly parents who are new to our community? You want to engage them, they want to be part, but the way this reads, it's troublesome to me. That's page 6, item 4E.
I'll see if any of my other folks have a more specific answer. What I would say to you is, you're nailing it, though. This is a key issue. We want to do it well. One of the places, beyond what my own folks will say that we've done, I'm going to reach out to the county to look at how they've involved. There's a ton of community organizations in the county. They're gathering data, how they've done it, because the county is a little bit more into this for having the formal trust policy and how it works for their community services group and all the organizations. So I would look at best practice from some of these other school districts too that were in the appendices, specifically around the PTO. I know the PTO has been an issue from the parents, the PTA and the PTOs, and the information gathering has been an issue for some time for the board, and we want to make sure that we get that right as we get this trust policy implemented. So I'd probably have to, let's see if others have anything else, but we'd probably have to come back with you and lay out at a future Brand briefing what some of those best practices will be. But rest assured, they will be communicated with. And I have a final meeting with the Council of PTAs coming up, and this will be one of the things that I'm going to elevate in my discussions with them, and we'll work with our staff here to get some training coordinated over the summer.
Well, I appreciate that because it's, and please, Dr. King or Ellen, because I think what I don't want to inadvertently happen is we want this, we want to bring them in, but if we can't connect with them, how can we do that? And this language is perplexing to me at this point.
One option I think that we should consider, we had a lot of discussions. I think half of our discussions were around our annual opt-out forms in terms of what's directory information, what isn't, what do the PTAs and boosters get, what can they not, which has also changed under state law in the last few years, which has made it also more complicated for PTAs to get this information. But I think one option and place where this would comply is perhaps we can look at some language for direction to those groups that are going to be requesting what can we can not do. And these are the things to be kind of aware of to make sure they're thinking about barriers to access to those groups and concerns that families might have. We do obviously review the annual opt-out form every year and tweak it. So that would be, and we've already talked about some other opportunities to make it clear as well. Right now, I know that it's a lengthy, it grows every year, we add things, but that would be one other option. And I'm not saying everyone reads that cover to cover, but it might be something with when it's communicated out that you could lift up these new sections for help and support to those organizations.
Yeah, I agree. Tammy, we're taking great notes on your suggestions, and we will go back and circle back with you around that specific request.
Okay, because I know we're doing it for the right reasons, but I feel like I said it could create an unnecessary barrier. So thank you for that. And I guess F, I have a question from what technology solutions are you talking about specifically on, again, it's page 6, number 4, F.
So I'm wondering if Mr. Frisch could help us with that one?
I'll say it very briefly, and then I'll take it in my own time later. But the idea is that if information is not shared because of certain concerns, there may be technology solutions that allow for parents in classrooms to communicate with each other without actually sharing personal information. So exploring that possibility. Dr. Anderson says Remind is an example of that.
Okay. Do we have anybody, Dr. Braybrand, from our technology team that is additional? I appreciate my colleagues, but I don't know how systemically we could do that.
Well, I don't have it right in front of me to look at. We talked about this. We're not ready for prime time on this, but this is an aspiration of where we want to go, what we'd want to do. I have to tell you that Gotham has come in and helped us revision things that we didn't think were possible. So I don't have the answer yet, and we're not saying when you pass it on, when and if you pass it. When you pass it on Thursday, then on Friday I have this. But we do want to aspirationally start to say, how can we start to find some of that innovation to be able to do that? He doesn't have the answer today. I did ask him about it, and one of the things I did say to Mr. Frisch in governance, we need a little bit more time. I can't pull this off with the team over the next month or two, but we will aspirationally add it, and it is one of the things that Gotham is going to look at moving forward for IT.
Okay, so I look forward to hearing about that because those would be new things. And finally, I did confer with the chair on this. There is a part of the policy that I would like to discuss in closed based on a particular student case and how it may or may not have been handled with this policy. So, Ms. Pekarsky, will we be able to do that today quickly? Because it will be a very specific case that I will reference.
You want to say something?
Today, the only thing I'd say is I'd love to be able to get the information to brief the board. I have no
I
idea.
already talked to Division Counsel about it.
Okay. Well, I defer to the board. I'm not aware of the case, and I'm not prepared to address anything to the board today on it, but I'd be prepared later this
It's the way
week.
this policy could impact.
Okay, I defer to the board.
Thank you. We are going into closed scheduled at 1, so we do have a hard stop and a hard start at 1, but we're hopeful that we can leave a few minutes to just get started with closed a little earlier.
All right. Mr. Annette Kofax, would you like me to add you to the go-back list, or are you in a good place?
I'm in a good place.
Okay. I have Ms. Tolan, followed by Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. Happy to follow Mr. Annette Kofax. We have similar questions. Thanks again to everyone who worked on this policy. It's exciting to move forward with this. I have always advocated for safe and welcoming environments for all of our students, and this is a big piece of it. I really appreciated the crosswalk that you put together between what the county has and what we have. That was really, really helpful to make those comparisons. One of the things I was going to ask about, on slide 11, you had employees, and it just says employees that reinforce confidentiality obligations. And to me, I just could think of so many employees that might fall into that category, and I was concerned about how everyone would be trained. So I'm very happy to hear about that professional development planning that you will be doing, and look forward to hearing more about what that is. And I'm glad we brought up the SROs, and there's so many different areas and so many different people that will need to be trained with this. So that's really just a comment that I'll look forward to seeing that training plan. I did have some questions too around the PTA data, the booster data, classroom data, classroom teachers trying to get a hold of, parents, and was really excited to just hear about the potential of the technologies that we might be able to use. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that. The one question that I do have, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about, is just the whole idea of student data and confidentiality of student data is such a huge issue for us, for every single student, not just families that fall into this category. So I'm curious how you might see the implementation of this policy and some of these things that you're looking at around the various, directories and technology use, just how it could be beneficial for every single student in Fairfax County.
So you're asking specifically about how we protect the confidentiality of student data in a variety of formats. And I think this policy really helps to clearly articulate that is a priority. And then through our training plan, we will be very clear about protecting student data and the confidentiality therein. And I think as far as like the directories, I think that as Dr. Brabrand had mentioned, having communication with PTA and other parent organizations and ensuring that they're clear about the policy as well as the next steps from the policy, which would include a regulation. So I think that communication is going to be really important moving forward, not only with employees, but also with our volunteers and our parent organizations.
Great. I think it's just helpful for the public just to understand too that, even though this trust policy is really geared toward, particular families and population, a lot of the things in here are good for everyone. So Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Mr. Frisch, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get through a lot of the questions that were raised in the conversation, so I'm going to avoid my normal pleasantries at the top, but thank you, everyone, for your involvement. CASA and ACLU People Power and the dozens of other organizations that are supportive of this policy as written would not be here and supporting this policy if it were merely window dressing or if it was merely a communications ploy. School board policy is the law of the land in a school division, and it drives the regulations and the practices in buildings. It takes discretion away from the superintendent to enforce a regulation or not. And when a policy is specific like this one is, it confines the superintendent and administration to be very meaningful and focused in their implementation of our policy. You can look throughout this policy, the number of times we say shall is pretty, it's up there. It requires a complete review of all collection practices, of all contracts. It requires reports to the board from the superintendent when things are changed. It requires that going forward, we look at collection practices. It requires that going forward, we look at new contracts. It requires that we look at our intergovernmental agreements to make sure that things are in the spirit of this policy. That would include our MOUs. So it is much deeper than a communications tool. I would also say that among the things that this does is it makes sure that the sharing of information is much more closely monitored. It requires judicial warrants for any involvement with immigration officials. That is a big change. It requires that. It speaks specifically to the questions about our relationship with the police department. And I would note that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office has recently implemented a trust policy, and the Sheriff's Office, the Sheriff's Department has implemented a policy of not informing ICE when immigrants are released from custody. So those buttress what we're doing here and what the county's doing on its own. It requires reporting to the board, as I said, and a review from the superintendent. Is there communication in this? Yes, and I think every good policy would have communication. In fact, it is very prescriptive in the types of communication to make sure that every family is aware of this policy. From signage in schools to make sure people understand that our buildings are a refuge for them, to direct communications in every requested language or available language is made as well. That was a big priority for Dr. Anderson and I. And I know it was of the board when we requested a policy that aligns with the county. Is my time up, or did the timer just not? Oh, somebody should have said something. There was no buzzer or anything.
You were on a roll. Mr. Frisch, would you like to go back?
Yes.
Okay. We have Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be quick. I don't have too much substantive to add. My concerns have also been with the data sharing. I do want to talk a little bit about, where this policy will be important is the PD, of course. And it's important because I'll tell you, literally my first experience as an ESOL teacher was a child who came in and gave me some very, very personal information that could have been extremely hurtful to that family. So making, very clear to staff to understand, what the expectations are is important. And we're an educational institution. That's what we're here to do for kids. So I'm very supportive of this and aligning with the county. My worry is around the PTAs and the community education piece, getting the PTA buy-in. I think that will take some intentionality beyond just a meeting. Maybe something like a toolkit. Maybe we get them into the conversation to go out to their PTAs to discuss this. The reality is, for most of our students and parents, this changes nothing, this impacts nothing. But for those that really need this, it's a life changer. So that's my commentary. I know you all can take it away, and I see you probably have a lot of ideas around that already. I just want, I want to make sure that we bring them in. They understand, they explain to their families. Community buy-in is so important, and this is about the caring culture of FCPS, and everybody in our community is on board with that. So we need to make sure that people understand that. Thank you.
We've noted your great suggestions. Thank you.
I'm going to skip Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. We'll come back to her when she's back at the table. I just want to say I really do appreciate this work. My family was fortunate enough during the pandemic to partner with the school and do grocery boxes every week. And it was the first time in my life that I saw a community send a scout to make sure before anybody came to pick up the grocery boxes to check and make sure that there was nobody from ICE or law enforcement there. And that was standing between folks having food for the weekend and not. So if I know that none of us are naive enough to think that our districts don't have folks that this impacts every single day, but just a stark reminder to me that we do. We've talked a lot about our obligation this year and our duty really to protect all of our students and create a welcoming environment. This couldn't be, more closely aligned with the work we've been trying to do this year. I think this fits into this continued conversation. I will echo what Mr. Frisch said, that if we did not have our community partners who were helping inform this and push it, I would definitely have more concerns. Every piece of language has been vetted by folks who represent the folks who need this the most, and that is a big deal to me. I had written down toolkit. I'm pretty sure you looked at my paper, but that's fine. No, it's fine. I'm sure I was the only person with that good idea. But also PTA, we just have to keep pushing into our brains that PTA and PTO are not the same. And so PTA has a structure that helps inform. PTO does not. So I just want to make sure anything we're doing we can replicate for PTOs, and we're going to have to work with individual schools since there isn't a mechanism like FCC PTA to push information out. I think getting this done quickly so that our SIAs, our SROs, our parent liaisons, there's a lot of people who are embedded in the day-to-day management of this data. I agree with Ms. Toland. This policy helps everybody. Everybody. We keep having these conversations about student data. We've been talking about third-party data collection for a long time here, and the concerns about it. This fits so neatly with that. I think that's really important. And just I think this is one of those policies too where we've really got to overcome the silos. So OCCR, IT, equity office, obviously you're here, thank you. But making sure that this is ingrained in every piece of what we do. The change at the state level a couple of years ago that you had to opt in for a directory changed what PTAs do. If they're not doing that in PTOs, they are out of compliance with state law. That has nothing to do with us. So a lot of systems have already started that work by doing electronic systems and things like that. And just to Mr. Frisch's point, to help answer the electronic piece, even as part of boosters now, and I can only speak as a crew parent, like there's an app that's Team Snap where every parent, as long as you have a phone number, every parent gets it. They don't need to know any information about me other than I have a child on crew, and nobody who doesn't have a child on crew can even see this communication. So to your point, there's a ton of technology that's out there. We do have a few folks, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I'm sorry, and then we'll go to go-backs.
Thank you, and I'll be quick because many of my questions and comments have been answered. And thank you to governance, thank you to our advocates, Casa, and everybody who really worked hard. Thank you to Diane to bring this. I am very supportive. I did have a couple of questions that I'm not sure have been brought up yet around this. First of all, just making sure when we're talking about training and that sort of culture shift that we're looking at summer staff, because sometimes we have summer staff who who are hired for some of our programs to make sure that it's also covered for our summer people. The other piece that I have is a crosswalk between our other regulations and this, because I know when we think about implementation of this, any regulation that we have that involves interaction with law enforcement, that this of course would apply. But when it's not specifically listed in there or reminders, so for example, there's just two off the top of my head that in the research I did, right? Regulation 2111.3, blah, 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 mentions threat assessments, right? And are we thinking about the interaction between this new policy and regulations and conducting threat assessments? Handling requests from police officers to question students, like to make sure that there's at least something flagged when someone's implementing a threat assessment policy or another policy, that something is flagged specifically for someone to trigger somebody to think about, wait a second, I need to keep in mind the parameters of the trust policy when implementing this one. So that's when you look at your PD or in your regulations to make it very explicit, because we know to do that crosswalk, but I think sometimes people get siloed in their head when they're thinking about certain things and don't always do that crosswalk. So, and then of course, we need to make sure we keep our schools safe and keep our students feeling safe, and all of our students. And to Ms. Tolan's point, this I think will help everybody and it's good for everybody. So those are just the two things I wanted to add to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heiser. Anything that you all wanted to say in response to that?
Well, in the policy itself, a number of regulations and other policies that are connected to the trust policy are referenced. We also linked some of those to board docs for your easy access. And I think the one that you had referenced, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, we will be sure to include.
I had some time. I appreciate that. What I was actually talking about was the opposite referencing. Right, so with the trust policy references all of these regulations, right? But if you have a regulation where in the action of implementing that regulation, such as a threat assessment, it may trigger something under the trust policy to make sure the trust policy is referenced in those regulations. So I was talking about the other way around.
We hear what you're saying, and thank you for clarifying, and we'll make a note of that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I have 3 people who've definitely said they want to go back. One, Ms. Keys-Gamara, I have a question mark by your name. Did you still want to go back as well? Yeah, it would be really. Perfect. Okay, so first I have Dr. Anderson, then Ms. Omesh, then Ms. Keys-Gamara, and then Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to be sure to address is the impact to PTAs and PTOs, and thank you for raising that statute. The days are gone where classroom teachers, because I know I was there, would literally hand room moms and PTOs and PTAs lists with kids' IDs and information and date of birth. Those are gone. They do have to opt in. And so there is some limit right there. But having said that, the FCC PTA provided a letter of advocacy and support for this since last year of 2021. They do not see this as impeding the work that they do with our families. I think they see it as an assistance to the work that they do with our families because they are not engaging because of fear. Being explicit that this is not a thing that's going to expose your family, the way that Ms. Pekarsky shared with those very sensitive information being, shared by kids, is very helpful to them. And the technology, and wanted to clarify that this says shall explore. A lot of the technology is already in place, whether it's WhatsApp apps, what you talked about, Remind is something that is utilized by so many classroom teachers to engage with students. And so I don't see a space where our PTOs and PTAs are going to be limited. And I actually see an expansion because people will now want to participate. One of the things that I also want to be sure that we talk about outside of the greatest impact is how information is shared and what information is shared. And again, it's going to give folks an opportunity to think about, when I share this information, does this person need to have this, and how much of this information do they need? Names and phone numbers are fairly benign, and anything beyond that requires the scrutiny that is provided by this policy. The training and signage is key, because I've worked in an office where you've trained everybody in the office, and then they are all absent on the day that the police officer comes in. What are you going to do then? You didn't train all these substitutes. That's why the signage all around the office is going to be so important. So when you have all of these subs, who are your office managers, et cetera, that they don't inadvertently do something that they should not. And I see that my time is up. That was the fastest 3 minutes in the history of the world. Okay, I'll stop there.
Sorry, it was a 2-minute. We snuck it in
Oh,
there.
I wasn't
2-minute
told.
go back. Sorry.
We
Ms.
still got
Emmett.
until 1. I just want to remind us of that. Okay, so two things. One, you know, the fidelity of implementation piece, I kind of want to see if we can do a little bit more work on. You know, I know as a board, when we've had things come forward, we don't have a clear plan or coherent kind of idea of how this is going to play out. What's the timeline? What are the components? We've asked for a plan before we voted something forward. So I actually feel very strongly that in this case, we should not be voting on this the day after tomorrow, after a discussion like this, but perhaps schedule it for a later time and request a plan from staff that is more thorough around some of the concerns that have been brought up. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's actually going to be voted on the 28th, so we do have a little bit of time.
Okay, I checked the agenda and
It's
I
on
saw
consent.
it. Okay, I saw it on
New
board
business.
docs, maybe I misunderstood.
It's on new business.
Okay. It said action, but that's fine. So that's one piece, and I would ask that perhaps if we can look at ways that we actually put some teeth to this and a plan before we approve this. Because in my mind, I'm like, you know, the fidelity of implementation concern around kids having preschoolers having kindergartners having iPads, and the fidelity of implementation concern of a family being torn apart and a kid being sent somewhere else, the stakes are just, you know, unbelievable here. So with that in mind, my asks, you know, I think as pieces of that, I think having, number one, and then the county side has not only a plan, but a person devoted to this. So this goes back to, again, what I'm saying. We can't be signaling something we're not ready to put in the resources, the real work that's going to get us there. So, you know, one, we should probably revise the SRO MOU to add some of that language. I think that'll be a cohesive community process of bringing, you know, stakeholders who are directly impacted by this through trusted partners to have that conversation. I'd like to see, you know, a commitment from us. Are we willing to say, if we identify a case of malicious reporting, which is happening in our schools, are we willing to fire that person? I mean, I think, because, you know, I get the HR processes of violating procedure, but this is not just violating procedure. And I know that there's PD to be done, misunderstanding, whatnot, but malicious reporting is another thing. So we should have an investigative process in place. And then what are the steps going to be from there? So that's a piece of what I'd like to see in that plan. And then I don't have time for my second point, but since we have until 1, I'm going to ask for another round of go-backs if we can manage it.
We can have some go-backs, yes. All right, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Mr. Frisch.
Colin, can I just, this is Nardis, yeah. If I can
Of
just
course,
respond to
sorry.
something, yeah. I just want to make sure that, you know, we can't commit today to saying that we're going to have the reg written by the 28th, and I don't want us to leave here thinking that that's the case, right? If this regulation is going to be as thoughtful as we need it to be, we need time to be able to do that. So I understand what you're wanting, I just don't want to leave here thinking that that's going to happen.
Thank you, Dr. King. All right, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Mr. Frisch.
Just point of order, if you don't mind, Ms. Khan. That's a piece of the scheduling that I think I'd want to see if, you know, chairs can discuss or whatnot, because I agree, that's not enough time. But
Yeah, that's not, let's come back. I hear you. Let's do that on the next round.
Okay.
So I make my following comment to support a number of my colleagues, but always realizing that we're focusing on continuous improvement. So not really expecting instant responses, but this is just a consideration. I note on page 5 as well as 6, it starts with division council, administrators and their various roles. And this kind of goes along with what Ms. Omesh was saying, is that when we have a number of people handling information, we increase the likelihood that we will have a lack of fidelity. So I would like for us to look at how we can operate at the highest level of fidelity. I don't know if that means certifying certain people to be able to make sure that they're overseeing this. I don't know. This is an operational issue. But I can say, based on our experience, we all have had experiences, not necessarily in this area, where we're wondering why one thing happened in one school and something else in another. So, I would just say, if you could look at that in terms of your regs and provide some assurances to the extent that you can. I'm cognizant of how large our organization is, and we sometimes we don't even know what all our kids are doing, right? So anyway, not that that's a comparison, but whatever structures we can put in place to try to reassure the community that this is how we plan to achieve fidelity. I am concerned with the number of duties, for example, just picking out the Office of Division Counsel, knowing that there's certain duties that are already there. How are we having dedicated employees? And those are the things that I think people are worried. There's so many moving pieces here. So what can we put in place to try to avoid fidelity breaches?
So I can share with you our process for providing required training for employees. And there is a number of opportunities for those required trainings. And this could become one of those required trainings where there is either a face-to-face or a virtual option for training. And then there is a certification at the end of it that person or those persons have completed the training and certify that they understand and will apply the information within that required training.
Knock yourself out.
We might also have a checklist that's available for each of these types of things, so that people not only have a one-time training, but when they handle something, they have steps they go through to check as part of that process. And I know that kind of steps into the operational, but I'm just offering that as a possible consideration.
Dr.
Thank
Brabrand.
you.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Brabrand.
Just one thing as I'm listening, because I think maybe this is part of it. If you vote on the 28th, on the 29th, is everything done? Everything's perfect? Every training's been done? No. So if that's the worry, perhaps you pass the policy at the end of the month and say that this is effective for the 22-23 school year, so that our leadership conference, our RAS kickoff, our meeting with the PTAs happen, our SRO MOU training over the summer, and that's the plan. Most of the time, you all have passed policies, and then we make plans based on them. So, and I get the spirit of both ways. What I think you're most worried about is saying this is the promise of trust, but gosh, you don't have every piece. We've been doing a lot of it, but we haven't done it all with fidelity. Maybe the answer, you pass it this month with the intention that this is part of the operation of the 22-23 school year, and the superintendent and the team have clear direction that these things need to be in place. That may be the win-win among the board as I listen to your conversations, but we'll listen for further conversation. And you're giving us the elements that you want to be sure are in place as the school year starts, which is when a lot of this data gathering happens anyway, by the way, and people have their hands on the data, the clubs, the sports, the registration of students. Thanks.
Mr. Frisch?
Thank you, and good segue. One of the reasons that CASA and ACLU People Power support voting on this on the 28th is because an early version of this that first came to governance had, we'll do this by this date, we'll do this by this date. That was all stripped out because we just don't do that in policies. And Dr. Anderson and I have planned on doing a follow-on motion when we bring this to the full board that requires the implementation for the coming school year. That's why we're doing this right now, is so that there's time to get it done. So I would make a note of that. I do want to speak to directory information, because I think there is varied experiences with what people get from their classrooms, regardless of when their kids were in school. I'm sure we've all heard from parents who said, well, I got this information recently from a classroom. If that happened, it was against the law. So, can you speak about what directory information is and how the law changed to require opt-in versus opt-out?
So directory information is, every year we get to determine under FERPA, these are these sort of innocuous items that if you were to release, they would not cause anyone particular harm, and it's, it's the grade, it's the, name, and it used to be the student's address, phone number, and email address. And in, I think it was 2018, the Virginia Code basically said you cannot define and include in that list student address or phone number as part of directory information that you only need an opt-out. You have to have a parental consent to release those two items. And so accordingly, we removed that from our list of directory information items because we didn't think it was something that we could, realistically expect to get on an opt-in basis from our families. And so that's why it's no longer in that list, and we've had to figure out other ways to accomplish, partnering with the entities that need information, et cetera.
And so to put a finer point on that,
Mr. Frisch, can you make sure your mic's on?
there's a problem I've never had before. Have the opposite problem. The piece about the PTAs and PTOs speaks specifically to their functioning with the information. We don't govern their practices, but it would be great if they would align their practices with this new thoughtful approach of the school division. Again, many of these things we're not doing, or we're not doing with fidelity. So it's important to get it right. The only other thing I would say is that I think everything else has been covered that I want to talk about, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. I do just want to, not to be a pain in the tush, but make a point to say, I know that somebody mentioned that name and phone numbers are not, are benign, and that, we're finding that's not true. You can do a backwards reference, a backwards search, and you can find out information. So that's why I do think these keys, I think IT is going to be our saving grace here, where you don't have to give those numbers out, and they are kept centrally by somebody who knows this. I do like the idea, Ms. Walls, of that this has to be required training, because we know, unfortunately, if it's not required, a lot of times it doesn't happen. And I recognize there's only so many minutes in the day, so I am trying to be respectful of that. But we just, if we don't require it, it's just going to happen piecemeal. This has to be required. This is so important. I will say, just to my colleagues, I did get a note that certainly the groups who have worked really hard on this want this to be passed, that they understand that regulation follows policy. That's always been our practice. Every once in a while, the stars align and we get to bring a reg in for people to look at before they pass the policy. But that doesn't usually happen. So I do think, us helping to give some guidance towards the reg, great. Whatever you're willing to take in from us or share with us, I think it is important. But it is our job to set policy, and it's your job to set the regulation. And I feel like it's appropriate, and I am supportive of this happening and voting on the 28th. All right, we had two folks, since we've got a little bit of time. Two folks will do another 2 minutes. I had Dr. Anderson and Ms. O'Maish. Was there anybody else? And Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Oh, you had a regular go back. Sorry, I didn't have you on the go back list. All right, hold on. So Ms. Corbett-Sanders first, then Dr. Anderson, and then Ms. O'Maish.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you provided more clarity. I wanted to address two things. One is we talked about the importance of having a toolkit for training. I would actually map that with an onboarding for volunteers in our schools, because not all of our schools are members of the PTA or the PTO, but they may be volunteering as a mentor in the school or other function. And they may hear something that they think incidentally is interesting, but it actually could be linked to personal identifiable information. And that's why I would suggest that we have a standard or onboarding toolkit for anybody who volunteers in any one of our buildings, who has access not only to structured data, but informal data as well. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the implementation of this, and I absolutely appreciate that people want this to start at the beginning of the school year, of next school year. And I'm supportive of that, but I'm actually concerned that we have 40,000 students who will be participating in summer school this summer. And I would like, to the greatest extent practicable, that we start messaging the importance of adhering to this prior to the start of next year. And that is because with 40,000 students, that is, 1 in 5 kids. It's actually 1 in 4 kids closer to it. So that would be my advocacy.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Dr. Anderson, followed by Ms. Omesh.
Thank you so much for saying that, and hopefully we could start to begin to have the conversation for summer school with staff, even though everything may not be in place. So thank you so much for raising that. I also wanted to share what Ms. Cohen just articulated, and she was reading my notes here, in that this work and all of the folks that it impacts are closely working with some of the folks that are in this room. We've got Diane, we've got CASA, and again, that letter lists a lot of signatories of people who work with families who will be most impacted. They've been very, very aligned with us in this work. I'm even sitting here right now, I'm getting emails and text messages about, please don't let this not be passed on the 28th so that you can begin the next step. They have been very involved, right down to the last letter. And Helen has, she has been very key in making sure that we are keeping ourselves in compliance. We do need this to go forward on the 28th to kind of start the next piece. So I want to be in support of that. But I do want to kind of go back to a point that Ms. Omesh had mentioned in terms of the stakes here are very, very, very high for families. Once they're outed and deported, there's very little that can be done. So I do want to make sure we're underscoring how fidelity to this is so important. So can someone speak to what is that discipline process for staff when they violate policy?
Well, I don't think Mr. McDonald is here. Oh, well, there he is. He's here virtually, Mr. McDonald. Let me just say before he makes comments, we have full HR policies that govern appropriate behaviors and a full set of disciplinary actions that we can take up to and including dismissal. But I'll let Mr. McDonald add a little bit more to that.
Thanks, Dr. Brabrand. Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately we would, engage the employee around the infraction and work to assess the impact and then employ a progressive discipline approach in terms of addressing the behavior and correcting the behavior. So that would involve essentially having the principal or program manager work directly with that individual and consult with the HR team around how to navigate and address the individual's behavior. I'm sorry if I didn't fully address your question, and if there was something missing, if you let me know, I can clarify.
Well, I guess what I'm asking for, because the consequences are so dire, is there any way to have a little bit more teeth or have some sort of expedited, I don't want to say necessarily skipping steps, but just some sort of stronger language when the violation is of this policy?
We can always look Mr. McDonald, I would say we can always look at that. We really need to be case-specific, fact-specific about what happens. I do agree the consequences are huge. We take this seriously. I mean, this has been work we've been doing with you to get to where we are. So I am eager to see this pass, give us the time to build the full ramp of training, communication, really retraining and making sure it's formalized, it's universal. But yes, we're going to take this very seriously. And I might say there are other policies and regulations that this board has brought to us around other issues, child abuse and reporting, Title IX. And we've heard your feedback and been very clear about how we've dealt with employees. So I feel our track record, I'd like to say, has been when this board has made it clear what the expectations are for employee conduct, we have shared it and we have acted on it. And I know we will in this case as well. Dr. King, did you want to make another point?
I just want to say that we cannot meet the expectations of a caring culture if this is not a priority to us, and it will be a priority to this team.
Thank you. The next piece is a question regarding when PTO and PTA representatives access the News You Choose to send out messaging, what's the training that's involved in that? And can we encompass this kind of training during that process? And if there isn't, there needs to be.
Can you repeat that question, please? Because I want to be sure I understand it.
Right. PTAs and PTOs are given access to the News You Choose so they can communicate with their school communities. What training is involved during that provision?
I'm really not sure what training PTAs and PTOs receive. However, as we have discussed today, there would be communication with those organizations as well as other parent organizations who are directly involved with families and students. That will be part of the regulation and part of the plan. However, I don't know what they receive right now.
Then I would just like,
I'm not sure because I've been out of the schoolhouse for a while now, but I know when I was principal, they did not have direct access. They had to send it to us for approval, and we sent it out. If that's changed, then we'll work with communication to make sure that when we're training PTAs and PTOs, that they have access.
I will follow up, Dr. Anderson, with Helen Lloyd. I know I will follow up with her and make sure that we have a component for that as we implement this policy moving forward. And I just want to go back on the discipline. Let me just be perfectly clear. Based on the discussions I've heard today, anyone with malicious intent is not going to be part of this organization, okay? Just like non-discrimination, which Ms. Cohen reminded me that we already have language about that. We will be very clear on what the expectations are for our employees to do. We do want to leave a little room just for fact-specific, case-specific, unintentional, but we need to realize that even unintentional, the best of intentions, the consequences are significant. So it's culture change that's been ongoing, but this is the next big step to frankly formalize it, universalize it, and codify it forever. So I'm so glad you all are doing it.
thank you. I do want to say, Dr. King, I think it is not as consistent across schools in terms of what the access looks like when it comes to the News You Choose. But I am looking forward to having this comprehensive policy to put together all of those different things. Some of them have been happening and some of them are new, but having it be embedded in a comprehensive policy, I think benefits our families tremendously, and I'm very excited to see this come forward. Thank you all.
I have Ms. Omesh and then Ms. Pekarsky.
No, I appreciate where this conversation has been developing, actually. Mr. Frisch just reminded me the SR&R conversation is another where we can address this, and I'm hopeful whoever is, Dr. Boyd's not here, I guess, but that, Dr. Raybrand, you're hearing it. Maybe we can have some language there to put some teeth to this of what we're just talking about. Because obviously there are employee mistakes that are up for dismissal immediately and ones that aren't, right? So perhaps we can put some language there, flagging that. The other question I had, when can we expect a plan by realistically for your team to do the good work?
We are taking copious notes today and making sure that your suggestions and recommendations will be part of that plan. Realistically, I can't give you a specific date or a specific time, but what I can say is that as we enter the summer school season, we'll have some pieces in place for those staff who will be part of the summer school program. And then as we enter the new school year for the leadership kickoff, which is at the end of July, we'll have some additional pieces in place. And then we'll continue from there. We'll continue to build from there.
Okay.
And Ms. Omesh, I just want to make sure that when we're talking about SR&R, that's student conduct and not staff conduct is mentioned in there. So I'm not sure about the teeth for this policy in the students' rights and responsibility.
It might be with student rights that we say something explicit,
Ms. Somesh, this is what I can say to you. I'll be superintendent through June 30th. We'll have a preliminary plan with a preliminary timetable looking at full implementation going into the 22-23 school year with some work where we can to embed some of this in our summer school programming that Ms. Corbett-Sanders and others shared. So by June 30th, I'll have in a Braybrand briefing or a Monday letter some sort of broader timetable and some of the elements so that you can see that the work that you all vote on at the end of this month is moving forward with the administration, and it's not going to be lost in the transition. Okay?
Yeah, and ideally, that would be something scheduled for conversation. I think, I think there have been a number of concerns raised for different reasons, PTA, this and that. Perhaps that could be something that comes back to the board in something more than an email. Stella?
So I'll speak to this in a minute when it's my turn, if you want.
Okay, I mean, I think that's an extremely important component. Obviously, my intention of delaying a vote would have only been to make sure it comes back and is a discussion, is a priority. I don't feel very strongly about that at this point, but I do think we need to also communicate that the plan is effective next year. That's critical. I don't want people in this false, sense of security that is not there yet. And I had a question for Ms. Kennedy, if you don't mind, just in terms of what the law limits us with right now, like what we are not able to commit to. I think in the same way that it's important for us to say this is what we are committing to, we have to say this is what we cannot, because of the law, because of whatever, that we cannot commit to, and that needs to be communicated to the community as well, so that we don't put people in risky situations they're not informed about.
I was thinking maybe what would make sense is to spell out a little more, if you're concerned about putting people on notice of what I think it's really mostly around what we're doing with data, and it's all FERPA driven, right? So I'm wondering if your concern would be in part satisfied by spelling out more, these are the, or cross-referencing again with our Student Scholastic Records Manual, this is when your data will be used, right? Like this is what staff does with the data, like these are the exceptions to FERPA when we're allowed to. We give it to contract vendors or whatever it is, and because we need to be able to, what we need to do the work. Is that partly what you're going, because in terms of what, I might be off track with your question, so if you want.
No, not at all, it's okay. If I mentioned the example of discipline earlier, right? Where things just end up out of our hands. And we're telling people you're safe regardless, but they're not, right, in a case like that. So that's an example.
Well, I guess that actually does, then I think what I'm saying is probably along the lines of what you're saying as well, right? That these things these are times when things do have to be, put outside of our wheelhouse, because this isn't to say, purpose is we are acting with good intent at all times and doing everything we can to protect our students, particularly when they're accessing services, et cetera. So if you're looking for, and this may happen down the line, we can certainly think of ways to draft that if you feel like there are places where people need to be on notice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having language in the policy that says it's effective next year is a start. And then that specifically, anywhere that we're going out there showing off, hey, we're a sanctuary school system, et cetera, we need to also say, but be mindful, these scenarios, that these pieces are out of our control, that these things may occur, something like that. Is the least we can do to maintain trust with our community. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to lend, you want to go again? Okay. I'll go after. Go ahead.
Item 7.3D stipulates that administrators will communicate to families how they are impacted by SRO involvement, and that SROs are only involved in should be only involved in criminal investigations, in which case, that is when it becomes out of our hands. So there is an effort in here to communicate that to families, and I think I get your point there. Second, very quickly, and then I'll yield my time. Want to reiterate that Dr. Anderson and I are bringing a follow-on motion. We'll circulate language tomorrow. It will include the point made by Ms. Corbett Sanders and others that we should also front-load it as much as possible before summer session. So people will have that with a few weeks to go before we actually have this as an action item on the 28th.
I did want to clarify that the communication issue is not necessarily just in the school. The communication issue is how we communicate to the community now about what this means for FCPS. Thank you.
Ms. Pekarsky?
All right, I'll go. Thank you. I do think this needs to be voted on the 28th, so I want to lend my support for continuing our timeline, but I do understand what the sense of urgency is and that this doesn't get lost in the shuffle. So I think Dr. Brabrand, staff is hearing that there is interest in getting up details and what that looks like. So equity, so I know we have people who are patient and the push and working with a lot of our FCPS families to overcome some of the obstacles that they've had in our schools. So thank you to all of you. My last question, and I wanted to get into, it was what Dr. Anderson actually brought up, which is this news. What news you choose, yes, which I have had access to in the past with no training. Yes, it does happen. And I appreciate that, my principals have that trust in me, but what it brings to light is that we need to have consistent regulations around what does access look like. Our principals need to understand that. We have, and I'll tell you, PTAs would like to also know what the consistent practice is because they would love to partner with principals and say, look, we have this information. Would you please put it in your newsletter? Would you please send this out? And some principals, I think most principals actually do a phenomenal job partnering with our PTAs, PTOs, and doing that. But maybe if we can codify it, if we already haven't, and make sure that our administrators understand it, I think that's a piece of this that we need to actually do at this point. So, thank you. Right on time.
Thank you so much. And, since we have till the 28th, obviously, for any of my colleagues who have thoughts and concerns or wonderings after this, this team is amazingly responsive. So please make sure you reach out to them prior to the 28th. And thank you all again. This is great work. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just say we'll take a 5-minute break and then the board will go into closed. Thank you. We're at working lunch today. Yeah. Move. Sure. Ms. Madeja, do we have all of that ready? Do we have the motions ready for certification? Oh, yeah. All right, folks, one more administrative item. Board will now make a motion to go into closed on What's that? The board will now make a motion to go into closed meeting today on April 12th, 2022 to discuss and consider candidates for employment as division superintendent pursuant to sections 2.2-3712 and 3711A1 of the Code of Virginia, and also to consult with legal counsel regarding legal matters relating to the selection and employment of our new division counsel for the school division pursuant to section 2.2-3711A8 of the Code of Virginia, and to dispense with the attendance of the superintendent or his designee pursuant to Virginia Code, I know it's section 22.1-69 during or all of the meeting. And I need something else to be added. Can somebody add something else for me, counsel?
And to discuss application of policies to existing Virginia state law.
And to discuss application of policies to existing Virginia law, moved by Ms. Corbett Sanders, seconded by Ms. Derenak Kofax. All those in favor, thank you. Thank you, everyone.